And joining us now on the Newsmaker Hotline is Ambassador John Bolton, former UN ambassador, and we're so good to have you here today because we got lots of questions about what's going on in Syria. Just to recap very quickly so that everybody is up to speed, the president said if chemical weapons are used in Syria, that there is going to be a red line drawn.
A red line for us is we start seeing a whole bunch of chemical weapons moving around or being utilized.
So he went a step further just to make sure that everybody got his point.
I have made clear that the use of chemical weapons is a game changer.
So there you have it. Now, chemical weapons have been used in Syria, Mr. Ambassador, and it seems that the president is going to do little or nothing about it.
Well, I'm sure the game at the White House in the past few days has been to try and identify what fool is responsible for letting the president say that. This shows, I think, an unfortunate pattern of the Obama administration that the talk is easy and action is a lot harder. There's a lot of rhetoric in the administration, but very little that follows up. Personally, I happen to think the red line he drew was the wrong red line. I think that the real interest for the United States is making sure those chemical weapons don't get outside of Syria or fall into the hands of terrorists that can be used on a worldwide basis. I don't think it's a tragedy inside Syria, but it's a tragedy now with 70,000 dead with only limited use of chemical weapons. Our interest is in making sure we're not attacked worldwide. And I have a somewhat different view, I think, than a lot of the Republicans on the talk shows yesterday. I recognize that when the president lays down a red line and then doesn't follow through, it's a hit to his credibility. But just because you say something foolish doesn't mean you need to compound the error and go on and do something even more foolish. We're going to suffer a cost here. I think it's inherent in our election. We elected this guy. Now we're going to have to suffer for 4 more years with him. And the big picture here is that the president's lack of credibility has affected the whole government. And if I were sitting in Tehran today, I'd say every time the president says all options are on the table concerning the Iranian nuclear weapons program, I just turn the radio off.
Well, I mean, he put himself in a box because if he does nothing, he emboldens the people in Syria and, as you point out, the Iranians and other people around the North Koreans, for goodness sake. But if he does do something, it's probably not a wise move, and it will alienate him, many people who support him politically.
Yeah, that's why I say it is a hit to our credibility. That you cannot blink that reality. We now look very foolish for having set a red line that we apparently are not going to do anything about. But I think it's better, you know the old saying, when you're in a hole, stop digging, or in poker, don't throw good money after bad. Economists call that the sunken cost fallacy. When you're in deep, you don't make things any better by doubling down. And so I think we've just got to take the hit to our credibility and find another way to convince Iran that maybe we're not serious, but the Israelis are.
Ambassador John Bolton's our guest. And Ambassador Bolton, I've been wanting to ask you ever since we learned about the nature of the terrorist attack in Boston, and we found out specifically that the Russian government gave us a heads up on these guys and said, you got to look into this. And I know that you were part of the Bush administration as we were building coalitions overseas trying to fight the global war on terror. And this is exactly what we wanted our allies, even a tenuous ally like Russia, to do for us. So since they did that for us, and then we clearly dropped the ball on this thing, how does it hurt us in terms of our international relations and getting more cooperation in the future?
Well, the Russians have their own agenda here. They have brutally repressed the Chechens. That's no excuse for Chechen terror, but this is one of these conflicts where it's hard to find the white hats. But I tell you, the Russians have been worried about Chechnyan involvement in al-Qaeda and other international terrorist groups for a long time. I remember going to Moscow with Secretary of Defense Rumsfeld within a few months of 9/11 back in 2001. We met with Putin, and he went on at great length about Chechens who were in Afghanistan, Chechens who were hooked up with al-Qaeda, Chechens throughout the Middle East. So it just boggles my mind that the Tsarnaev family got political asylum in this country 10 years ago? Where was the investigation of what kind of persecution they were fleeing in Chechnya, and knowing it was a hotbed for terrorist recruitment? Didn't anybody check that out? And then you come forward to the Russian tip you mentioned, to the several drop balls. You know, if Tamerlane Tsarnaev was the victim of persecution in Russia, his family was, and that's why they were granted political asylum. How is it he's able to go back to Russia for 6 months? What does that tell you about the original grant of political asylum? And why is our system, 11 years after the first 9/11, still so defective that all these red flags get lost? It really, there's a lot to go into here. I think the House Homeland Security Committee under Congressman McCall is going to be looking into this. He's got an ocean of facts to sail on here. We've got a lot to uncover.
We had Joe DeGeneva, our legal analyst, on earlier, and he pointed out that his law partner, Victoria Tunsing, is trying to represent some whistleblowers with regards to the Benghazi investigation, people who are actually there, people who know the truth about what happened, and that the legal department over at the State Department was trying to block that as actively as they possibly could. Can you imagine that what something like that happened during the Bush years?
Look, they'd have been on Capitol Hill within hours after the attack. This is so typical of the government, and I think of this administration in particular in trying to defend its narrative that, you know, the war on terror is over, Al-Qaeda's on the road to defeat, the demonstration in Benghazi was just hyper-caffeinated and got a little out of control. Vicki Tunsing has done a lot of work over the years for whistleblowers in the diplomatic and intelligence community, and if anybody can break them free of this effort to prevent them from testifying, I'm sure she can. But the real question for us as citizens is, what is the administration trying to cover up here? If it wasn't terrorism, as they first said, then they don't have anything to worry about. If it was terrorism, then they've got a lot of explaining to do, which they still haven't done 7.5 months later, as to where they got the crazy story about the Mohammed video.
Yeah. All right, John Bolton, always good to have you. Thank you so much for joining us, Ambassador.